The African sun dipped toward the horizon, stretching elongated shadows over the arid savannah as Zuri raised her head to the deepening twilight. Her limbs shook under her, scarcely holding up her emaciated frame. In the dimming glow, her golden eyes caught the fading sunlight, making her appear as a being imploring unseen powers beyond her grasp. Her chest rose and fell in ragged gasps, her ribs jutting prominently against her lackluster, tangled fur. Behind her, in a shallow hollow under a withering acacia tree, lay her sole surviving cub, Keto. His minuscule form hardly stirred, his breath so weak that each one felt like it could be his final. Just 3 months prior, Zuri had birthed 3 robust cubs right there. Now, only one teetered on the brink of existence, and she was utterly helpless to rescue him. If the unbreakable tie between a mother and her offspring has ever tugged at your emotions, we invite you to join Wild Heart Stories. Each subscription enables us to bring more of these genuine, moving tales to light, highlighting the remarkable bonds in the animal world. Your backing fortifies our group committed to revering the profound affections found in the wild. United, we can disseminate these narratives of optimism and loyalty far and wide. 4 months before, Zuri was a valued part of her pride, a formidable huntress who supplied food for her kin and safeguarded their domain in the eastern parts of the Maasai Mara. She had matured within this group, mastering hunting skills from her mother and aunts, proving herself as one of the finest trackers among them. But circumstances shifted dramatically when the pride's leading female, McKenna, detected Zuri's pregnancy. In the intricate social structure of lion groups, expectant females might be viewed as risks, especially amid scarce resources and heightened strains. McKenna had just suffered the loss of her own litter to a roving band of males that had temporarily contested the pride's land. In her sorrow and fury, she directed her aggression at Zuri. The assault struck abruptly one dusk as the pride lounged post a triumphant hunt. McKenna pounced with alarming velocity, her mighty jaws clamping close to Zuri's neck. The warning was stark and savage: depart or perish. Zuri's siblings observed quietly, their allegiance to the alpha overriding any familial or friendly ties. In moments, Zuri was ousted from her lifelong home, pursued across the expansive plains by the lions she once deemed family. She fled until her lungs ached and her limbs failed, eventually crumpling far off in unknown terrain. Isolated and exposed in an environment that now felt immense and antagonistic, pregnant, fatigued, and exiled, Zuri had to adjust to solitary existence as a lioness. Lions thrive as team hunters, collaborating to fell sizable game such as buffalo, zebras, and wildebeest. A single lioness confronts daunting challenges that would discourage most carnivores. She could only pursue diminutive, frail creatures, and even those pursuits were perilous and often fruitless. She seized whatever opportunities arose. Juvenile impalas strayed from their dams, ailing warthogs, or the rare rabbit when alternatives vanished. Yet it was perpetually insufficient. Her physique nourished not merely herself but 3 developing cubs in her uterus, each requiring sustenance and vitality she struggled to supply. The delivery arrived prematurely, incited by tension and undernourishment. Zuri sought refuge under the expansive limbs of an old acacia on the fringe of a desiccated riverbed. The labor was grueling and extended, persisting through the darkness and into the next dawn. She bore 3 offspring, 2 males and 1 female, but she sensed instantly that all was amiss. The cubs were undersized, their wails fainter, their actions less lively. Nevertheless, a surge of maternal drive overwhelmed her. She cleansed them with licks, guided them to her udder, and experienced an intense, shielding adoration that overshadowed her personal agony. For the initial weeks, Zuri exerted every effort to sustain her young. She seldom departed their burrow under the acacia, only embarking on short hunts while they slumbered. Her milk yield was inadequate. Her form lacked the stores for sufficient feeding. But she suckled them relentlessly, wishing her scant offering would suffice. She tended them meticulously, warming them in the chilly nocturnal hours and shading them during the blistering days. She observed their sluggish, feeble growth, and for a fleeting, delicate interval, She permitted herself to think they could all endure. But the dry spell descended rapidly and pitilessly. The expected rains of late March failed to appear. The pastures shriveled, shifting from verdant to tawny to powdery ochre in weeks. The vast migrations of wildebeest and zebra that usually traversed this area altered paths, pursuing water sources miles westward. Enduring water sources diminished, then evaporated, leaving only fissured clay and the frantic imprints of beasts questing for hydration. Game grew extraordinarily rare. Days elapsed without Zuri spotting any viable quarry. When she did hunt, the beasts were as famished as she, yielding scant nourishment. Zuri's body started devouring itself, depleting muscle and adipose to sustain even the paltry milk her cubs required. Her robust flanks became hollow, her limbs slimmer, her pelt drab and fragile. She sensed her vigor ebbing daily, her renowned power seeping away like liquid into dunes. And most devastatingly, she witnessed the identical decline in her offspring. They fed with mounting urgency but appeared to derive no benefit. Their bones protruded, their cries diminished, their frolics briefer and less spirited. The initial cub to succumb was one of the males. Zuri awoke one morn to discover him chilled and immobile, his petite frame stiff in demise. She prodded him persistently, rejecting what her senses already confirmed. She lapped his visage, attempted to heat him with her form, emitted deep, sorrowful tones from her thorax. But he was departed. She transported his remains from the lair and laid it tenderly in a minor dip, concealing it with friable soil and arid foliage. The anguish was unparalleled, a corporeal torment that excavated her core and left her wheezing. 3 days hence, the second cub, her lone daughter, joined her sibling in death. This instance, Zuri lacked the fortitude to relocate her. She merely reclined beside the diminutive corpse for hours, her flanks convulsing with muted weeps, her gaze clouded with an agony surpassing bodily distress. She had faltered them despite every impulse, every forfeiture, every instant of watchfulness. She had proven inadequate to preserve their lives. The burden of that defeat menaced to pulverize her utterly. Only Keto persisted, the tiniest and most frail of the trio. By rationale, he ought to have perished first, yet some tenacious ember of vitality within him declined extinction. He persisted in suckling, though Zuri knew he gleaned nearly naught from her barren nipples. He persisted in vocalizing hunger, his timbre slender and piercing but resolute. And Zuri, shattered as she was, could not relinquish while he battled on. But battling ceased to suffice. Zuri comprehended with utter surety that sans aid, Keto would expire in days. Her form possessed naught further to bestow. The terrain offered zilch. She was ensnared in an untenable plight with no remedies, no alternatives, no aspiration. Or so she believed, until a recollection emerged from her depleted psyche. A recollection of the human Zuri had observed, Dr. James Thornton, on various occasions, though he remained unaware of her scrutiny. James served as a wildlife healer for the Maasai Mara preserve, delivering care to wounded and ill creatures across the sanctuary. He was a serene, enduring man in his early 40s, with sun-hardened complexion, compassionate gazes behind thin-framed spectacles, and palms that operated with habitual tenderness. Zuri had initially spotted him 3 years past when her pride rested near a gathering of visitor conveyances. James was present, stooping by a juvenile elephant calf detached from its group and harmed by a spine lodged profoundly in its hoof. She had observed from the high weeds as he meticulously tranquilized the calf, extracted the spine, sanitized and medicated the injury, and lingered with the infant until its matriarch returned, bellowing in alleviation and appreciation. Throughout the years, Zuri had beheld James numerous times, invariably from afar. She had witnessed him mend a zebra with a suppurating gash, nurture a youthful cheetah offspring forsaken by its parent, and calmly entice a panicked warthog into a conveyance crate for resettlement. She had seen him chuckle with his mortal associates, distribute sustenance among them, and manage even the most alarmed beasts with a softness that appeared nearly inconceivable for a being unbound by impulse to nurture. most crucially, she had beheld an event that imprinted indelibly on her consciousness. 2 years prior, when Zuri still belonged to her pride, one of her relatives birthed a feeble cub unable to feed adequately. The cub weakened daily, its pleas more frantic, until the dam executed what nature occasionally mandates. She deserted it to perish, conserving her vigor for her vigorous progeny. Zuri had sensed the calamity but grasped the severe arithmetic of endurance. Yet James discovered that cub, scarcely vital and moments from oblivion. Zuri had trailed discreetly, driven by an inexplicable inquisitiveness. She observed as James enveloped the cub in a plush cover, conveyed it to his transport, and over ensuing weeks reared it with vessels of dairy substitute, heating it by his blaze at nightfall, restoring its health. Ultimately, he fruitfully reintegrated the cub into another pride with recent births, and the juvenile lion was embraced and flourished. That memory glowed in Zuri's mind like a signal. James had rescued a cub condemned by the wild. He possessed the capacity to furnish what she could not: provisions, remedies, instruments of persistence beyond her ken. He represented her singular prospect. The epiphany accompanied a dread that rendered her frame ache. Every impulse rebelled against her contemplation. Mortals were hazardous, erratic. They slew lions, ensnared them, repelled them. Voluntarily nearing a mortal contravened eons of adaptive coding. It was lunacy. It was self-destruction. But it was also the sole avenue ahead. Zuri gazed at Keto, nestled in the soil beside her, his petite thorax ascending and descending with labored superficial inhalations. His lids were shut, too enfeebled now to part them. She could enumerate each rib, observe how his hide hung loosely on his shrinking form. He had perchance 2 days remaining, perhaps fewer. She contemplated her other offspring, frigid and rigid beneath the ground. She reflected on the pride she had forfeited, the existence she had known, the might and honor that once characterized her. All vanished. All that endured was this singular delicate life and the implausible decision confronting her. As obscurity enveloped the savannah wholly, Zuri resolved. She would seek the mortal. She would rely on him in a manner defying the wild itself. She would entrust her cub's fate to his grasp and aspire that the tenderness she had noted was authentic, that the empathy she had seen could encompass even her. It was insanity, but it was the sole insanity proffering even the dimmest likelihood of optimism. Zuri delicately seized Keto in her maw, cradling his flaccid form as meticulously as if he were woven from gossamer. She repositioned her clasp until assured he could respire, until his mass rested firmly against her fangs sans discomfort or compression. Then, with her pulse thundering against her cage and every sinew quivering from depletion and apprehension, she commenced trekking toward the locale where she had last beheld James's encampment, several miles eastward. The trek would consume the night, traversing exposed terrain where she would be susceptible to fellow hunters, beyond domains controlled by antagonistic prides and wandering males. She doubted her arrival. She doubted James's presence upon reaching. She doubted his assistance or harm. But she recognized she must attempt, for the option was witnessing Keto expire in her clutches, appending his diminutive frame to her mounting catalogue of defeats, and that was an anguish she could not withstand. Thus, Zuri advanced, one quaking stride after another, bearing her expiring cub toward the singular entity in the expansive wild who might wield the ability to preserve him. The inaugural hour of Zuri's odyssey proved the most arduous. Each pace demanded a deliberate volition, a purposeful selection to persist when her physique clamored for respite. Keto's mass in her maw was both trivial and intolerable, physically negligible, yet emotionally laden with her entire aspiration, sorrow, and perilous wager against demise. She readjusted him incessantly, horrified that excessive grip might injure him, yet equally alarmed that lax hold might permit slippage. His petite form stayed alarmingly inert, and multiple times she halted to deposit him tenderly on the earth and verify his continued respiration. Each instance, his tiny chest stirred with faint, scarcely noticeable intakes, and each instance Zuri experienced a rush of respite so potent it infused renewed vigor into her faltering limbs. The Maasai Mara's vista morphed under the moonless gloom into a domain of silhouettes and faint noises. The obscurity was incomplete. The constellations blazed with intense lucidity in the pristine African firmament, supplying adequate illumination for navigation. But it was dense enough to conceal perils until perilously proximate. Zuri's faculties, blunted by fatigue and famine, stayed hypervigilant. Her oracles pivoted ceaselessly, detecting the swish of foliage that might indicate a nearing carnivore, the remote yips of hyenas signaling a pack hunting, the gentle treads of quarry she no longer possessed the potency to chase. Her vision, attuned for nocturnal sight, surveyed the blackness for motion, for the sparkle of observing orbs, for any menace to her or the invaluable load she bore. 2 hours into her voyage, she met her primary hindrance. The aroma assailed her prior to the clamor, an intricate blend of musk, gore, and the unique stench of spotted hyenas. Zuri's core clenched with terror. Hyenas were potent hunters individually, and in clusters, they could readily overpower even a vigorous lioness. In her present condition, debilitated and encumbered, she would be essentially defenseless. She decelerated her tempo, every perception straining to pinpoint the pack. The noises emanated from her port side, perhaps 50 meters distant in a minor basin. The hyenas were feasting on something, their uncanny whoops and snarling disputes over flesh fragments echoing distinctly through the tranquil night. Zuri performed a prudent assessment. She could detour around them, extending mileage and duration to her path, or opt for the straighter course that would position her within 30 meters of the dining group. Every moment counted for Keto, yet clash could terminate all in instants. She selected the direct trajectory but proceeded with excruciating lethargy, situating each pad with utmost caution to evade cracking branches or rustling parched grass. She regulated her respiration, maintaining it superficial and mute, and beseeched whatever entities ruled the savannah that the hyenas would be overly engrossed in their repast to detect her transit. Luck for once sided with her. The pack was profoundly immersed in their feeding spree, contending over what seemed the carcass of a juvenile wildebeest. Their belligerent utterances masked any minor sounds Zuri produced, and the sanguine odor from their quarry overpowered her own scent path. She glided past like a specter in the gloom, her amber pelt merging with the russet weeds. Only after establishing a full kilometer between herself and the hyenas did she permit normal respiration. Her limbs trembled so fiercely she almost buckled. She paused for 10 minutes, lowering Keto to the terrain and reclining adjacent, her flanks undulating with weariness. The confrontation had depleted vital energy she could ill afford. She lapped Keto's countenance, endeavoring to rouse him, to elicit any indication of reactivity. His lids flickered ajar momentarily, unfocused and vitreous, before sealing anew. His respiration persisted perilously shallow. Time dwindled. Zuri compelled herself upright, elevated her cub once more, and resumed marching. The distances blurred in a surreal fog of torment and resolve. Zuri's realm contracted to 3 elements: the sensation of Keto in her orifice, the remote reminiscence of James's encampment locale, and the imperative of advancing one pad before the next. She forfeited awareness of chronology, of expanse. Her limbs functioned mechanically, propelled by something profounder than deliberate cognition. Multiple times she faltered, recovering just prior to tumbling, the dread of releasing Keto providing the adrenaline surge requisite for stability. Her sight commenced blurring peripherally, and she vaguely realized she might approach her form's endurance threshold. Aurora broke over the eastern skyline, tinting the heavens in hues of rose and aureate, when Zuri ultimately surmounted a gentle incline and beheld her quest's object. Below, in a modest vale protected by a grove of fever trees, rested a camp she identified. It exceeded a mere tent arrangement. A durable fabric edifice functioned as both haven and atelier, a conveyance stationed nearby, and various lesser tents arrayed in a semicircle. Photovoltaic panels shimmered in the nascent light, and apparatus crates were orderly beneath a canopy. But paramountly she perceived activity. A silhouette emerged from the primary structure, extending in the matutinal radiance. Even remotely, Zuri discerned him, James. Dread and solace surged through her equivalently. She had located him, defying probabilities. She had completed the expedition, and he was present. But now ensued the genuinely implausible segment, nearing him, confiding in him, positioning herself and Keto at his benevolence. Every impulse still shrieked to retreat, to escape, to conceal. Mortals signified peril. Mortals signified anguish. Mortals signified demise. But mortals also signified deliverance. If the recollections she harbored were valid, if the benevolence she had beheld was genuine, if this frantic venture could conceivably succeed. Zuri initiated her descent toward the camp, advancing deliberately and intentionally. She desired James to perceive her approach, to avert alarming him into a protective response. She knew that if he deemed her a hazard, he would probably seize an armament, discharge a cautionary blast, enact something to propel her flight. She must convey somehow that she was not assaulting, not pursuing, but soliciting, imploring, capitulating. James detected her at approximately 30 meters distance. She observed him immobilize, his dawn vessel midway to his lips, his whole form rigidifying with astonishment. His orbs expanded behind his lenses, and for an extended instant, he merely gazed, incapable of comprehending the spectacle. A feral lioness, skeletal and shivering, advancing straight toward his camp in full daylight, bearing something in her maw. The vista contravened every precept of fauna conduct he knew. Lions shunned voluntary proximity to humans. They evaded camps, preserved separation. Whatever transpired, it was exceptional, and potentially lethal. Zuri scrutinized his countenance meticulously, interpreting his expressions with the acute focus of a hunter who had invested years surveying this mortal. She beheld his astonishment morph into vigilance, beheld his palm shift instinctively toward the tent housing likely a firearm or sedative device. But then she beheld another, inquisitiveness, and the initial glimmer of familiarity. James narrowed his eyes at her, examining her demeanor, her stance, the meticulous manner she bore her load. His palm hesitated, lingering but not grasping the armament. Zuri resolved. She ceased advancing and, with utmost delicacy and purpose, deposited Keto on the earth before her. She set him down as cautiously as if he were composed of dawn mist, then retreated a solitary pace, leaving him bare and defenseless in the interval between them. The motion was as explicit as she could render. "I am not here to menace you. I am here for him. Please." James's demeanor altered anew, and this time Zuri beheld comprehension illuminate his gaze. He placed his vessel down, his actions leisurely and unmenacing, and advanced a wary step, then another. He was nearing her, narrowing the gap, invading what should have been her offensive perimeter if intents were malign. Zuri stayed utterly motionless, every muscle secured, combating the impulse to bolt. James squatted about 5 meters distant, his eyes alternating between her visage and the minuscule cub reclining in the dust. "My God," he murmured, his tone scarcely audible. "I know you. I've seen you before." His eyes appraised her wasted silhouette, noting the acute ribs, the matte pelt, the manner she oscillated faintly on quivering limbs. Then his regard descended to Keto, and Zuri beheld his face contort with sympathy and dismay. The cub was evidently perishing, his respiration so tenuous that James observed for several seconds to affirm continued life. James rose gradually and retreated toward his camp, never diverting his gaze from Zuri. She observed him tensely, uncertain of implications. Was he procuring an armament after all? Had she erred? But rather than accessing the tent with weaponry, James approached a substantial chiller near the conveyance. He unlatched it, withdrew something, and returned bearing a sizable portion of fresh flesh. The fragrance struck Zuri like a tangible impact, causing her abdomen to contract with excruciating craving. Days had passed since her last meal, weeks since substantial sustenance. The flesh symbolized vitality, potency, endurance, everything her form urgently yearned. James advanced nearer, now merely 3 meters away, and positioned the flesh on the ground midway between himself and Keto. He withdrew again, granting Zuri room, observing her response. This was the trial, Zuri comprehended. This instant would decide all. She regarded the flesh, her maw salivating involuntarily, her form clamoring to claim it, consume it, replenish some forfeited might. She regarded Keto, scarcely respiring in the dust. She regarded James, observing her with a countenance of profound concentration and burgeoning amazement. Zuri advanced a step, then another. James stiffened but remained static. Zuri attained the flesh and inclined her head, her fangs inches from the sanguine tissue. She could sense the gravity of James's scrutiny, could detect his perplexity regarding ensuing events. Every strand of her essence demanded consumption, survival, fueling her form with the sustenance it direly required. For an extended moment, she maintained that posture, quivering with the exertion of defying impulse. Then, with a softness seeming improbable from such a hunter, Zuri grasped the flesh in her maw. She elevated it, pivoted, and advanced a few paces to Keto's location. She deposited the flesh directly beside her cub's tiny snout and nudged him with her proboscis, attempting to arouse him, to convey that nourishment was present, that he must partake. Keto remained unresponsive. He was too debilitated even to perceive the aroma. Zuri emitted a low, pressing tone in her gullet, a damned summons to her offspring. Still not. Behind her, Zuri heard an abrupt inhalation. She turned her cranium and beheld James standing with his palm over his orifice, his eyes luminous with moisture. He comprehended. He had beheld her action, witnessed her selection. A famished lioness, days from demise herself, had declined sustenance to offer it to her cub foremost. The exhibition of parental forfeiture was so deep, so completely evident, that it surpassed kinds and tongues. James acted swiftly now, his hesitation supplanted by resolute endeavor. He returned to his camp and retrieved additional provisions, a healing set, hydration vessels, covers, and what appeared specialized apparatus. He knelt beside Keto, his motions prudent and proficient, and commenced inspecting the cub. His palms traversed the tiny form, assessing pulse, warmth, moisture levels. Zuri observed anxiously, her impulses conflicting between the drive to shield her cub from this mortal's contact and the awareness that this contact was precisely what Keto necessitated. Severe dehydration, James muttered, vocalizing to himself but audibly enough for Zuri to hear, as if intuiting his serene tone might comfort her. Malnutrition. Hypothermia. He's in critical condition. He extracted a minor needle and injector, filling it with transparent liquid from a container. Zuri's sinews tautened, prepared to lunge if this posed a threat. But James displayed the injector, his actions deliberate and elucidative. Subcutaneous fluids, he said mildly, meeting her gaze. To rehydrate him. It'll help. I promise. Zuri compelled herself to stay immobile as James inserted the needle beneath Keto's dermis and gradually pressed the plunger. The cub didn't flinch, too distant to note the slight discomfort. James delivered the fluid in multiple sites, forming small protuberances under the skin that would slowly integrate into Keto's system. He then swathed the cub in a plush, heated cover and held him meticulously in his embrace. He needs immediate intensive care, James stated, regarding Zuri directly. I need to take him inside, get him warmed up properly, start him on nutrients and medication. He's barely alive. James hesitated, and when he spoke anew, his tone was laden with feeling. You brought him to the right place. You did the right thing. But you need help too. Look at you. James placed Keto down tenderly, still enveloped in the cover, and directed his focus to Zuri. He retrieved another segment of flesh from the chiller and approached closer, positioning it directly before her pads. Eat, he said resolutely. You can't help him if you die. Eat it, please. Zuri stared at the flesh, then at Keto slumbering in his cozy sheath, then back at the flesh. The inner strife was apparent in her gaze, the contest between maternal self-denial and the fundamental necessity for sustenance. James appeared to perceive her turmoil. He gently elevated Keto again, cover and all, and secured him. "I've got him," James said softly. "He's safe. I won't let anything happen to him. Now you eat. You've given everything. Let me help both of you." The utterances, though Zuri couldn't grasp their verbatim sense, conveyed a timbre and purpose that bridged their species divide. She gazed into James's eyes and discerned naught but earnestness, empathy, and resolve. She discerned the identical tenderness she had noted years prior when he rescued that forsaken cub. She discerned someone who cherished, who would strive to safeguard life, who comprehended her sacrifices to deliver her infant to him. Gradually, tentatively, Zuri lowered her head to the flesh and took a modest bite. The flavor erupted across her perceptions, opulent, sustaining, vitalizing. Her form reacted instantaneously, demanding more, and she commenced devouring earnestly, ripping chunks and ingesting them nearly sans mastication. James observed her, nodding contentedly while sustaining Keto securely. "Good," he murmured. "Good. You're going to be all right. Both of you. We'll get through this together." As Zuri consumed, James conveyed Keto toward the principal tent, advancing slowly so Zuri could trail if desired. She did, padding after him on limbs that felt somewhat sturdier with each gulp of sustenance. She followed him into terrain she would never have ventured previously, through the tent opening and into the peculiar human abode with its unfathomable implements and odors. But trepidation had been displaced by something else. Tentative, brittle confidence. James had beheld her forfeiture. He had respected it. He had vowed aid. And for the first time in months, Zuri permitted herself to believe her cub might endure. Within the primary tent, Zuri infiltrated a realm that contradicted all she had known. The area was methodical and intentional, replete with gear whose roles she couldn't fathom. Racks bore vials and receptacles. A robust board hosted instruments gleaming in the illumination from solar-fueled lanterns, and along one barrier, multiple enclosures James utilized for accommodating recuperating beasts. The atmosphere smelled odd, sterile and synthetic, blended with aromas of fabric and soil. But beneath it all was Keto's scent, sufficient to prevent Zuri from fleeing in horror. James proceeded with proficient intent, placing Keto on a cushioned platform and promptly connecting supplementary apparatus. He inserted a diminutive intravenous conduit into the cub's forelimb with expert accuracy, linking it to a sack of liquids suspended from a rod. He encircled heating cushions around Keto's form and overlaid additional covers. He employed a compact tool to auscultate the cub's cardiac and pulmonary functions, his expression solemn as he interpreted the findings. Throughout, he sustained a continuous narrative, speaking in that serene, tender tone. "Heart rate is weak but steady," he said, jotting on a sheaf of parchment. "Lungs are clear, which is good, no pneumonia. Temperature is dangerously low, but we're warming him up. The fluids will help with the dehydration, and once he's stabilized, we'll start nutrition." He glanced at Zuri, who had stationed herself as proximate as she ventured, monitoring every gesture with fervent concentration. "Your boy is a fighter," James informed her. "Just like his mother." For the initial 3 hours, Zuri remained stationary on the tent flooring, reclining with her cranium on her pads, eyes fixed on Keto's petite shape, tracing his thorax's undulation with anxious regard. James labored unceasingly, verifying displays, modifying gear, dispensing treatments. He provided Zuri hydration in a broad basin, which she imbibed appreciatively, and additional flesh, which she consumed with diminished frantic appetite now that starvation's acuity had dulled. He conversed with her perpetually, explicating his actions as if his verbiage could span their species' chasm and offer solace. The pivotal moment arrived late that afternoon. Keto, who had been virtually insensible since arrival, abruptly stirred. It was a minute motion, a mere flex of his pads and a faint mew, but to Zuri it was all. She elevated her cranium sharply, oracles forward, entire form tensing with aspiration. James noted it too and promptly assessed the cub's vitals, a grin spreading across his rugged face. "There he is," James whispered. "Come on, little one. Fight your way back." He readied an injector with what resembled dairy and with utmost care, coaxed Keto to ingest a few droplets. The cub's pharynx moved instinctively, and he swallowed. Then a few more droplets, then slightly more. It was minimal, barely sufficient to moisten a utensil, but it was something. It was advancement. Over ensuing days, a pattern solidified that would have appeared inconceivable a week prior. Zuri lingered in the camp, departing exterior only transiently and invariably returning swiftly to inspect Keto. James supplied her with consistent repasts, augmenting her exhausted form with requisite nourishment. He fashioned a cozy nook for her in the tent's angle with covers and pillows, and though Zuri didn't employ them as James planned, she valued the motion. She slumbered lightly, perpetually attuned to Keto's respiration, always prepared to rouse if needed. Keto ameliorated progressively but noticeably. By the second day, he could elevate his cranium. By the third, he ingested formula from a vessel James had crafted with a bespoke teat for large felid cubs. By the fourth, his eyes focused appropriately, following motion, recognizing his dam. When Keto first gazed directly at Zuri and emitted a minor chirp of acknowledgement, Zuri felt something rupture in her thorax, a barrier of grief and dread that had restrained any joy's potential. She neared him cautiously, permitted by James to approach, and tenderly groomed him with her coarse lingua. Keto inclined into the contact, rumbling faintly, and for the first time since the dry spell's onset, Zuri sensed hope's subtle arousal. James chronicled everything with a recorder and ledger, capturing the unparalleled circumstance unfolding in his camp. A feral lioness and her cub convalescing jointly under his oversight, with a degree of reliance he had never encountered in his 2 decades of fauna healing. He dispatched communications to his peers in the preservation web, delineating the scenario, soliciting counsel on optimal progression. Replies varied from admiration to doubt to worry about hazards. All concurred, this was extraordinary. As Keto fortified, the tense interactions evolved. The cub grew more dynamic, more frolicsome, more inquisitive about environs. He would swat at the intravenous line affixed to his limb, eliciting mild admonitions from James. He would attempt standing on unsteady limbs, toppling repeatedly until achieving momentary uprightness. He probed the tent with escalating assurance, sniffing apparatus, attempting ascents onto the board, ambushing the covers Zuri had disregarded. And Zuri, observing him reclaim the vigor that should have been innate, felt her own potency returning concurrently. James began permitting Zuri exterior more often, urging her to hunt, to reconstruct her sinews and proficiencies. The first occasion she triumphantly felled an impala solo, a pristine dispatch, swift and adept. She experienced a swell of pride and relief. She remained a lioness. She retained her capabilities. The dry spell was easing somewhat, with sporadic precipitations revitalizing flora and luring some game species back. The vista was reviving and so was she. But with recuperation arose a query all three, mortal, lioness and cub, must eventually confront. What ensues? Keto was prospering now, expanding swiftly, accruing mass, cultivating a healthy cub's playful vigor. Zuri was no longer skeletal and feeble but mighty anew, competent anew, perilous anew. James's camp security had fulfilled its role, but it couldn't be perpetual. Lions pertained to the untamed, not amid tents with humans. Yet the notion of departing James, the singular mortal who had beheld her at utmost vulnerability and replied with unadulterated empathy, filled Zuri with an unnameable sentiment. James seemed to detect the nearing juncture. 2 weeks post Zuri's frantic arrival, he sat proximate one eve as the sun descended over the savannah, coloring the heavens in vibrant tangerines and violets. Keto frolicked nearby, stalking a cord segment James had fastened to a tent peg, his motions already displaying a predator's coordination and impulse. James regarded Zuri, and she reciprocated, and a comprehension transferred sans verbiage. "But you can't stay here forever," James said softly. "This was always temporary. You know that, don't you?" He extended gradually, signaling his motion, and for the first time, Zuri allowed his contact. His palm settled mildly on her cranium between her auricles, and he caressed her coarse fur with boundless tenderness. "You saved him by bringing him to me," he continued. "But I saved him for you, so you could have him back, so you could raise him properly out there, where you both belong." Zuri leaned into the touch marginally, accepting the gesture. In that instant, something deep transpired. A linkage between kinds, erected on reciprocal esteem and communal aim. James wasn't detaining her captive. He never intended such. He was readying her for return to her realm, fortified and prepared, with her cub hale and intact. The boon he proffered was not reliance but liberty, not imprisonment but a renewed opportunity at her destined existence. Over the subsequent week, James meticulously orchestrated the shift. He commenced feeding Zuri and Keto exterior the tent, progressively relocating the feeding site farther from camp. He encouraged Zuri to hunt and return kills to share with Keto, instructing the cub to consume flesh, to comprehend sustenance's origin. He escorted them on excursions, exploring adjacent domain, allowing Keto to learn the landscape he would traverse. He supervised them incessantly, prepared to intercede if peril emerged, but increasingly withdrawing to permit nature's course. The night preceding the intended liberation, James sat with Zuri one final time. He had selected a site about 10 miles from camp, in prime domain with sufficient game and hydration, distant from the adversarial pride that expelled her. It was her optimal chance at claiming territory and rearing Keto to maturity. James had provisions ready, a concluding nutritious repast for both, monitoring bands to enable distant oversight sans interference, and a burdened heart at farewell's prospect. "I'll never forget you," James told her, his tone heavy with sentiment. "What you did, coming to me, trusting me, it's the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. You changed everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between humans and animals." He paused, gulping. "Take care of him. Take care of yourself. If you ever need help again, I'll be here. Always." Zuri couldn't comprehend his utterances, but she grasped his inflection, his melancholy, his affection. She pressed her cranium against his thorax, a motion of fondness and thanks that astonished even her. James encircled her massive cranium with his arms and clung, tears cascading his cheeks. Both acknowledged the improbable linkage forged in this ordeal of desperation and aspiration. The following morn, James transported Zuri and Keto to the liberation locale. He sedated them mildly for the transit, just sufficient to maintain calm in the conveyance, and they awoke to discover themselves in novel territory, verdant and auspicious. James positioned the final flesh for them, affixed the monitoring bands, and retreated. He observed as Zuri oriented herself, as Keto cavorted in the weeds, as dam and cub commenced exploring this fresh commencement. Zuri glanced back at James one ultimate time. Their gazes met across the expanse, and in that stare resided everything unspoken: appreciation, esteem, reliance, a love transcending biology and defying explication. Then Zuri averted, summoning Keto mildly, and jointly they advanced into the lofty grass, into the life they were destined, into the wild their veritable abode. James lingered long post their vanishing, the monitoring device beeping softly in his grasp, indicating steady departure. He dried his eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to the breeze, "Go well, my friend. Go well." In ensuing months, James oversaw Zuri and Keto remotely. The tracking information narrated triumph. Zuri claimed territory, hunted efficaciously, imparted all Keto required. The cub matured robust and hale, evolving into a splendid juvenile lion. They sporadically traversed near James's camp, though never neared it. But occasionally, late in the gloom when constellations blazed and the savannah hushed, James would hear a distant resonance, a low, rumbling summons he instantly recognized. It was Zuri, vocalizing across the obscurity, conveying in her sole manner, "I recall. I'm here. Thank you." And James would respond softly, knowing she could perceive, "You're welcome, Zuri. You're so very welcome." The narrative of the famished lioness who delivered her expiring cub to a healer became myth in the preservation circle. Scholars debated ramifications, analysts dissected conduct, doubters queried particulars. But James knew verity. He had experienced it. He had felt Zuri's cranium against his thorax, had beheld her decline sustenance to proffer it to her cub first, had witnessed the implausible linkage between kinds. Love, James realized, was unbound by adaptation or confined by heredity. It was a potency that could traverse any chasm, penetrate any obstruction, when necessity was immense and the spirit valiant enough. Zuri had demonstrated that. She had traversed terror to discover aspiration, through impulse to find reliance, through the wild to locate the singular mortal who could aid. In so doing, she had evidence that the untamed heart and the mortal heart are not so dissimilar. Both can adore, both can forfeit, both can trust in the implausible. In the expansive Maasai Mara, beneath the infinite African firmament, a lioness and her cub lived as nature decreed. But they bore something scarce and invaluable, the recollection of a linkage between realms, constructed not of verbiage or comprehension but of pure, frantic, splendid love. And that linkage, once erected, would endure eternally in the hearts of all acquainted with the tale, a testament to possibilities when bravery encounters empathy, when necessity meets mercy, and when one kind regards another and states simply, "I see you. I will aid. You are not alone."